Welcome, everyone, and thanks for being here. My name is Amy. My partner Amber and I created Campus Integrity Group after leading the Chicago Public Schools Office of the Inspector General Sexual Allegations Unit and decided that we should bring that experience and everything that we learned nationwide. So today we're going to walk through what a strong K-12 misconduct investigation actually looks like in practice and not just on paper. Whether you're an administrator, attorney, family, or someone just supporting others through this process, then this is for you. When a complaint comes in, the pressure to move fast is real. Administrators are juggling a lot at once, and the instinct to resolve things quickly is completely understandable. But what we see time and again is that speed without structure is where investigations go sideways. The goal is not just an answer, it is a fair, thorough, and defensible one. Before anything else happens, someone has to decide who's going to lead the investigation. That decision matters more than most people realize. The investigator needs to be free of any conflict, real or perceived, and have the right training and experience. For example, there should be no personal, supervisory, or professional ties to any of the parties involved. Perceived bias is just as damaging as real bias. The investigator should be trained in trauma-informed practices and should have knowledge of applicable laws and policies, both federal and at the state level. And investigators should have real experience conducting investigative interviews. Internal investigators can absolutely do this work, but there are circumstances where bringing in someone from the outside is the stronger call. This would be, for example, when a senior staff member is involved and scrutiny is likely. Interviews are the heart of most investigations, and the order in which they happen is not arbitrary. Starting with the victim allows the investigator to build context before anything else is introduced. Witnesses come next. They add perspective and corroborating or conflicting detail while the account is still fresh in their minds. And finally, the alleged offender. Armed with context, the investigator can ask sharper, more targeted questions. Good interviews do not happen by accident. They require open-ended questions so that people have room to share their stories. They require neutral language, so the way a question is framed shapes the answer. Neutral wording protects the integrity of the record. Trauma-informed approaches are necessary. How someone responds or doesn't often reflects the impact of what they experienced. It does not necessarily affect their credibility. And standard interview techniques are not appropriate for children. A trained professional should always be in the room when minors are involved. Confidentiality is one of the first things that many people ask about, and how you answer that question sets the tone for everything that follows. Information is shared on a need-to-know basis, so not everyone involved in a school will have access to what was said or shared. Investigators should be clear about this from the very beginning. And people need to know that their information will be handled carefully. They also need to understand that it does have limits. Confidentiality cannot always be guaranteed, especially when safety is a concern or when action needs to be taken immediately. It's also important to mention retaliation. It's actually worth spending an extra moment on. People sometimes stay silent because they're afraid of what speaking up will cost them. Making that protection explicit and visible matters. And finally, privacy protections extend to records. Investigative records are sensitive documents, and how they are stored, who can access them, and how long they are retained all matter and should follow district policies. A solid investigation doesn't wait for evidence to be handed over. It goes looking. That means that emails, surveillance footage, written records, prior complaints, and anything that could add context or establish pattern. And just as important as what is found is documenting the search itself. In fact, when evidence does not exist or cannot be located, that belongs in the record too. An absence of evidence is meaningful, and it should be in that report. The report has a specific job. It is not an opinion piece, and it is not a verdict. Its purpose is simply to present what was alleged, what was gathered, who was interviewed, and what the evidence showed. And this should all be written clearly and without bias. These components are the foundation of any defensible investigative report. And don't forget to include any applicable policies and necessary legal framework. Most district policies set timelines for a reason. When investigations drag on, it takes a toll on everyone involved and creates real legal exposure for the district. A credible investigation moves with intention. It's not rushed and it's not stalled. Each person gets a meaningful opportunity to be heard. Mind you, there will always be extenuating circumstances that add to the timing of an investigation. Just make sure that you let the involved parties know. Supportive measures are one of the most misunderstood parts of an investigation, particularly when the process involves Title IX. A lot of administrators either skip them entirely or treat them as punitive before any finding has been made. But the goal is to keep both parties able to access their education while the process runs its course. These measures should be individualized, non-punitive, and revisited as things develop. Failing to offer supportive measures at all is itself a compliance issue, not just an oversight. The complainant or victim and the respondent or alleged offender should have access to the same types of support services. For example, there can be no contact directives and access to counseling. This is one of the most important things we learned. A well-run investigation is not just about the two parties or multiple parties directly involved. It protects students and families who deserve a process that takes their experience seriously. It protects staff members, including those who have been accused. It protects the school because a well-documented, thorough process is defensible. Cutting corners leaves everyone exposed. And the broader community, because how a school handles a complaint shapes whether people trust the institution. So when an investigation is done right, the outcome holds up regardless of what it finds. So, should you use an internal or an external investigator? Well, both can be the right answer depending on the circumstances. The key is being honest about when the situation calls for outside help. An internal investigator will work well when the complaint is relatively straightforward and there is no supervisory relationship between the parties. The investigator should have proper training and experience, and their neutrality should not be questioned. It's also important to make sure that there is no conflict of interest. Outside help is stronger when a senior staff member or administrator is accused, when the process is likely to face scrutiny or media attention, when internal staff lack the experience and resources to conduct the investigation thoroughly, and when independence and credibility are critical. An external investigator is not an admission of failure. It's a sign of institutional maturity. There are a handful of red flags that indicate that an investigative process is off track. For example, no clear timeline. If no one knows when the investigation will wrap up, that's a problem for the parties and for the district. So remember to just communicate. Skipped interviews. Every relevant party deserves to be heard, and gaps in that interview record become gaps in the final report. And when that happens, the investigation, the decisions made, are less defensible. Evidence. We know that we need to record all evidence collected and what that evidence meant, but what was looked for and not found matters just as much. So make sure you document everything that you've looked for. Conflicts of interest. An investigator with any tie to the parties compromises the entire process. And finally, rushed conclusions. A finding made before all evidence is gathered and all interviews are complete is not a finding. That's just an assumption. Any one of these can compromise an otherwise solid investigation, and all five together is a serious problem. So be careful and pay attention, and make sure that you're following best practices when conducting an investigation. The investigative process can be challenged, and this is not a sign that something went wrong. Appeals are a built-in part of the process, and both parties have the right to use them. What matters is that the investigation was done well, and well enough to hold up. Common grounds for appeal include such things as procedural irregularity, new evidence that was not available at the time, conflict of interests or bias, and a finding or sanction that is disproportionate to the evidence or facts collected. What protects this process is thorough contemporaneous documentation at every stage of the process, a neutral investigator with no conflicts, evidence collection that was proactive and recorded, a report that presents findings without any type of advocacy or opinion, and timelines that were followed and or communicated and documented. If all of those things are in place, a challenge to the process is much harder to sustain. Think of every step in the investigation as something that may eventually need to be explained or defended, and make sure that you document accordingly. When the process is right, the outcome can stand, and that's really what this all comes down to. A thorough, fair investigation protects everyone involved and holds up long after the case is closed. If you have any questions about your own process, or you just want to talk through a specific situation, we'd be glad to help. Feel free to reach out via our website or at the email or phone number listed on this slide. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.